They told you the Gilded Age was a golden dream, a time of elegance, wealth, and progress. That's the lie they teach you. The truth? It was a hunting ground. The chandeliers, the champagne, the silk gowns, all of it was bait, a glittering snare for the women who married into the city's elite. And if you're hearing this, you've already stepped into a story you were never supposed to know. Picture it: New York, 1893. Fifth Avenue glows with the soft yellow haze of gaslight. Mansions loom like cathedrals to greed. The richest men in America walk those marble halls, railroad barons, steel tycoons, and banking dynasties whose names still control the arteries of power today. But behind the locked doors, whispers spread like cigarette smoke, whispers of wives who simply stopped existing. No ransom notes, no public searches, no police investigations worth the name, just vanished. And the families, they never spoke of it. Not in public, not in private. Their names weren't printed in the papers, their absence never acknowledged. It was as if they'd been erased from history by an unseen hand. And if you think that's impossible, ask yourself, who controls history? The winners? Or the ones rich enough to rewrite it? The society pages painted these women as delicate ornaments, but they were far from it. Many were intelligent, ambitious, and far too aware of the machinations around them. In a world where fortunes were built on monopolies and political corruption, a wife who knew too much could be as dangerous as any rival businessman. And here's the part that still makes the air in certain Manhattan drawing rooms grow cold. Some of these women had confided to friends that they were planning to leave, to expose what they had seen. The laundering of foreign money through charitable trusts, the secret meetings between Wall Street and Washington, the deals with European nobility that still ripple through our financial systems. Within weeks of speaking these intentions, they were gone. No bodies, no funerals, just vanished into the steam rising off the Hudson. Men like to imagine they control the world by force. But the true masters, they erase what threatens them so thoroughly, you'll swear it never existed. And tonight we're going to dig them up. Do you want me to continue directly into Section 2, so we keep the intensity and descent uninterrupted? The first name on the ledger is Eleanor Whitcomb. On paper, she was everything the Gilded Age demanded of a woman. Poised, impeccably dressed, her portrait painted by society's finest artists. But the photographs that survive tell a different story. Look closely, and you'll see the steel in her gaze, the quiet defiance in the way she holds her head. She married Jonathan Whitcomb, a shipping magnate whose fortune bled across 3 continents. A man celebrated in public for his philanthropy, yet whispered about in private for the bodies that paved his empire's path. Eleanor wasn't content to be a figurehead. While her husband sailed between Europe and the Americas, she began piecing together the family's shadow network. The cargo manifests never logged with customs, the passenger lists that didn't appear in official records, the payments routed through anonymous trusts. She kept it all in a locked diary, bound in green leather, hidden inside a false, bottomed trunk in her dressing room. Then, one autumn evening in 1896, she left for a charity gala at Delmonico's. She never arrived. Witnesses say she stepped into her carriage at precisely 7:42 p.m. The driver she trusted for years wasn't at the reins. Instead, a man in a dark bowler hat waited, his face turned away from the lamplight. That was the last anyone saw of her. By morning, the Whitcomb mansion had been stripped of her belongings. Servants said the master of the house ordered them burned. Her dresses, her jewelry, even the green leather diary. But here's the fracture in the story. One chambermaid swore she saw the diary stuffed under Jonathan's arm as he left for his private club that same afternoon. Weeks later, she too was gone. No one spoke Eleanor's name in public again. Invitations to the Whitcombs' events continued, as if nothing had happened. It's as though the city collectively agreed to bury her existence. That's how power works when it's old money. Not through scandal, but through silence. Some claim she escaped. Others whisper she was taken out to sea on one of her husband's own ships, weighted and dropped into waters where no fisherman dared cast a net. But there's a third possibility, one that chills even the most jaded historians, that she wasn't killed at all, but absorbed into something far larger. A network of vanished women whose silence was purchased with something more dangerous than money. And Eleanor Whitcomb was only the first. The second was Margaret Langford, a name that meant little to the public, but behind closed doors she was known as the broker's shadow. She married into the Langford fortune in 1891, a dynasty built on the violent consolidation of textile mills from Boston to Baltimore. Her husband, Charles Langford, was a man who smiled for photographs with presidents while ordering union leaders crushed in backroom meetings. Margaret was the quiet observer at his side, absorbing every whispered deal, every veiled threat. She played the role well, soft-spoken, devoted, a perfect hostess. But the truth is, she was building a private map of the empire's arteries. She kept meticulous notes, not in ink but in embroidery. Handkerchiefs, shawls, even the hems of her own gowns were stitched with patterns that, to the untrained eye, looked like decorative flourishes. In reality, they were codes, port names, shipping schedules, initials of men who moved fortunes in the shadows. In the winter of 1898, Margaret's behavior began to change. She withdrew from the social calendar, skipped luncheons, and sent cryptic letters to her younger brother in Chicago. He would later claim she feared she was being watched. Not by strangers, but by her own staff. She wrote of footsteps outside her room at night, of letters arriving opened, of her maid replaced without explanation. On February 14th, during a snowstorm that muffled the city in eerie silence, Margaret was seen leaving her townhouse just before midnight. She wore no coat, only a pale silk gown and slippers, carrying nothing but a small leather sewing case. She walked 2 blocks toward the East River and was never seen again. By dawn, Charles Langford had petitioned the court to have her declared in fragile health and need of rest abroad. Newspapers printed that she had taken an extended stay in Europe for nervous exhaustion. Conveniently, no photographs or letters ever arrived from overseas. Here's the part the Langfords didn't expect 3 months later. One of Margaret's coded handkerchiefs appeared at a pawn shop in Brooklyn. The shopkeeper, not knowing its significance, sold it to a collector of fine linens. That collector, decades later, would unravel its stitches and discover coordinates, pointing to a stretch of shoreline in Staten Island that had long since been built over. What was buried there, no one knows. But the pattern is clear. The Gilded Age was not just a stage for excess and elegance, it was a chessboard. And the wives were not pawns. They were queens. Dangerous queens. And the men in power. They knew the only way to stop a queen is to remove her from the board entirely. By the turn of the century, the vanishings were no longer isolated tragedies. They were a rhythm, a pattern so deliberate that, once you see it, you can't unsee it. Every year, without fail, a woman of wealth and influence, or one poised to gain it, would disappear under circumstances wrapped in elegance but reeking of precision. A gala, a late night carriage ride, a walk along the waterfront, all the trappings of romance masking the cold mechanics of removal. The newspapers didn't connect the dots. They couldn't. The publishers themselves attended the same dinner parties as the husbands. They owed favors to the same bankers, drank the same brandy in the same oak-paneled clubs where the disappearances were likely discussed, not with horror, but with approval. If you map the vanishings, and I have, a strange geometry emerges. Each wife was last seen in a location that, when connected, forms a perfect spiral winding toward the southern tip of Manhattan. The center of that spiral? A private meeting house on Broad Street, owned by something called the Maritime Protective Association. On paper, it was a union of shipping investors pooling resources for mutual security. In reality, it was a council of the city's most ruthless tycoons. A place where fortunes were defended not just in courtrooms, but in alleyways and in the dark holds of ships bound for nowhere. Inside that building, under the glare of crystal chandeliers, decisions were made about which women could be trusted to hold their silence and which ones could not. Those who couldn't, they were dealt with quietly, their absence folded into the unspoken rules of high society. You don't ask, you don't search, you don't speak. But here's where the air grows colder. There's evidence some of these wives were not killed. Surviving servant testimonies, buried in legal archives, hint at something stranger. Carriages that didn't go toward the docks but inland, toward hidden estates in the Hudson Valley. Places where women were sent away, under new names, stripped of their past, their titles, their power, not prisons in the conventional sense, no chains, no bars. But something far more insidious, a social oubliette. A place where the world forgets you exist while you live out your days in suffocating gentility. This was not random cruelty. It was policy. A system. A machine built into the bones of the Gilded Age, ensuring that the wealth stayed concentrated, the alliances unbroken, the secrets untouched. And the question isn't how they pulled it off, it's why they stopped. Or, if they ever truly did. The first crack came from a man no one expected. Not a journalist, not a policeman, but a butler. His name was Thomas Bellamy, and he served in the Langford household for over a decade. In the world of the Gilded Age elite, a butler was more than a servant. He was a silent archivist. He poured the drinks, delivered the letters, arranged the carriages, and heard everything. Bellamy was discreet, almost invisible, the way a butler should be. But Margaret Langford's disappearance broke something in him. He had been the one to fetch her sewing case that final night. He saw her slip something into it, not fabric but a stack of small envelopes, each sealed with red wax. She pressed the case into his hands and told him quietly, "If I don't return by morning, make sure this finds my brother." She never returned. And by the following afternoon, Bellamy was dismissed without notice. When he retrieved his things from the servants' quarters, the sewing case was gone. For 2 years, Bellamy drifted from house to house, never keeping a position long enough to regain stability. But in 1901, he appeared at the office of the New York Evening Post, pale and trembling, clutching a folder wrapped in oilskin. Inside were transcribed conversations, word for word, between Charles Langford and 2 other members of the Maritime Protective Association. The words were chilling references to relocation, permanent discretion, and removing her from the map. The Post never ran the story. The editor who met with Bellamy told him it was too dangerous to print, and the next morning, Bellamy's body was pulled from the East River. Officially, it was ruled a suicide, but the coroner's report vanished from the city archive. His personal effects, including the oilskin folder, disappeared into the custody of unidentified officials. Still, a sliver of his testimony survived, a single page folded into the lining of his coat. It surfaced decades later in an estate sale in Albany. On it, in neat handwriting, were 4 names. 2 were already known, Eleanor Whitcomb and Margaret Langford. The other 2 had never been connected to the vanishings before. And beside each name, in the margin, was the same symbol, a small spiral. It was the spiral again, the same geometric mark found when plotting the disappearances on a map. Bellamy had seen the pattern. He had tried to reveal it. And for that, he was erased, just like the women. The spiral wasn't just a pattern on a map. It was a signature, an emblem used only in the most guarded circles of power. You see, in the secret language of old maritime guilds, the spiral meant return to port, but not in the way sailors meant it. In this darker lexicon, it signified that something, or someone, had been brought back into the control of the inner circle, never to drift free again. Historians who specialize in secret societies will tell you the spiral has older roots. You can trace it back to European merchant fraternities of the 17th century, to the black, ink seals on coded ledgers from Venice, Amsterdam, and London. Always the same, a tight coil drawn in one stroke, like a whirlpool pulling everything toward its center. In those old codes, the spiral marked an asset secured, a resource removed from public reach, stored where only the Brotherhood could touch it. By the Gilded Age, that symbol had migrated to New York, carried over in the bloodlines of men whose fortunes came not from invention, but from centuries of colonial plunder and foreign banking. The Maritime Protective Association didn't just borrow the spiral, they weaponized it. When a woman's name was followed by that mark, it meant she had crossed a line, not necessarily in betrayal, but in knowledge. She had seen something, heard something, or pieced something together that made her dangerous to the quiet machinery that kept the city's power balanced in their favor. Bellamy's page, the one they failed to destroy, wasn't just a note, it was a kill list. Eleanor Whitcomb, Margaret Langford, 2 other names history tried to erase, and next to each, the spiral, as if their very existence had been pulled into the undertow of power. But here's where the spiral grows even more unsettling. In the city archives, buried among shipping insurance contracts from 1895, there is a single document stamped with the same symbol. It isn't a manifest or a ledger. It's a floor plan of a building that no longer stands. No address, no official name, just the outline of rooms, one marked with a strange annotation, the drawing room for guests who do not depart. And if you think guests means visitors, you're still thinking too small. The spiral wasn't just a warning. It was an invitation into a kind of captivity the public will never understand. Because once you're inside the spiral, you never leave it. Her name, at least the one she used when she resurfaced, was Clara Henshaw. But there is no record of a Clara Henshaw in the census before 1904, as if she had stepped into existence fully formed, with no past to trace. Those who met her described her as refined, intelligent, and carrying the kind of posture that only came from years in high society. Yet she lived modestly, almost invisibly, in a rented room above a dressmaker's shop in Philadelphia. In the winter of 1911, she agreed to speak, briefly, to a journalist for a women's rights paper. The meeting was arranged through a third party, and she made it clear: no photograph, no real name, no mention of location. Her voice was steady, but there was an undercurrent of fear in every sentence. She claimed she had once been the wife of a man with interests in ships and steel. She wouldn't give his name, but the details she let slip, the street their townhouse stood on, the year they married, matched the private records of one of the families tied to the Maritime Protective Association. She said she had discovered a ledger hidden in her husband's desk. A list of names, numbers, and coded notations that referred to shipments she knew were not cargo. She had planned to send the ledger to her uncle in Boston, a lawyer known for prosecuting corporate fraud. 2 nights later, during a formal dinner at her home, she was summoned upstairs by her husband's valet. In her bedroom, 2 men she didn't know were waiting. They said nothing, but handed her a note in her husband's handwriting. "You will be taken to a place where you will not trouble yourself with these matters again." She was blindfolded, placed in a carriage, and taken on a journey that lasted hours. When the blindfold came off, she was inside what she called house without an address. It was stately, with fine furnishings and warm fires, but the windows were shuttered from the outside. Other women lived there, dressed in plain clothing, moving like sleepwalkers through their days. No one spoke of the past. No one asked questions. Clara claimed she spent 2 years there before slipping away one rainy night when a careless guard left a service gate ajar. She never went back to her family. She never tried to recover her old life, and when asked why, her voice broke for the first time. "Because they were never going to let me leave a second time." For years, the house without an address was treated like an embellishment, the kind of detail witnesses invent when their memory blurs under trauma. But then, in 1978, during the demolition of an old estate in the Hudson Valley, workers unearthed something strange: an iron gate with a spiral crest worked into the metal, buried under layers of soil and wild growth. The property had been in the same family since 1890, a family whose name appears on multiple Maritime Protective Association rosters. Local archives revealed the estate once had a secondary building, smaller than the main house, described in vague ledgers as the guest residence. No photographs survive. The official explanation: it was torn down in the 1920s after falling into disrepair. But blueprints recovered from a county records office tell a different story. The floor plan matches the document found in the shipping insurance files, down to the exact labeling of one room as the drawing room, for guests who do not depart. And here's where it turns darker: the blueprints show no direct path from the guest residence to the outside world. Every hall loops back inward. The only exit leads through the main house, past a locked antechamber. In architectural terms, it's what's known as a controlled circulation design, more common in asylums and prisons than private homes. Investigators believe the estate was designed specifically to house women who had been removed from public life without technically imprisoning them. No chains, no guards patrolling with rifles, just architecture engineered to smother escape. And yet there's a deeper layer. In the cellar beneath the guest residence, the blueprints reveal a hidden corridor leading to a small, windowless room marked only with a spiral symbol. No description, no listed purpose. Its dimensions are barely larger than a dressing closet. But judging by the thickness of the walls, it was built to keep whatever was inside from being heard. The demolition crew claimed the foundations of the guest residence were unusually intact, as if preserved intentionally. But when asked, the property's current heirs dismissed it as family folklore and denied any connection to the Gilded Age disappearances. Still, the spiral crest on that buried gate, it matches the one Clara described, the one she said hung over the fireplace in the house without an address. And if that's true, then the vanishings weren't just about silencing women. They were about keeping them. The truth is far darker than the idea of silencing. These women were not simply erased, they were repurposed. The Gilded Age elite understood something most men never will: a wife is more than a companion in public. She is a gatekeeper of her husband's private world. She hears every whispered deal over brandy, reads every letter left on the desk, absorbs the names, dates, and numbers that could shatter empires if spoken in the wrong ears. Killing such a woman destroys the knowledge she holds. But keeping her, controlling her, means the knowledge can be harvested. Testimonies from servants, buried deep in probate records, hint at what went on inside that guest residence. Women were visited by members of the Maritime Protective Association at odd hours. They were given paper and pen under supervision, instructed to recall details from past events, shipping arrangements, the private finances of foreign investors, the unspoken terms of political favors. The women weren't tortured in the physical sense, not at first. But they were pressured, cornered, reminded that their cooperation meant a more comfortable confinement, and that resistance would result in being moved downstairs. No one described what downstairs was, but every account of the house speaks of that hidden spiral-marked room in the cellar, the one built like a vault. Servants said women who were taken there never returned. Why keep them alive? Because in the Gilded Age, information was currency, and these women were living ledgers. Their memories were mined for leverage, to settle debts, to crush rivals, to secure alliances. Some were even groomed into intermediaries, trained to pass coded messages through the rare correspondence they were allowed to send, ensuring the network's reach extended far beyond the city. Clara Henshaw hinted at this but refused to give details. She said only, "They didn't just take us to keep us quiet. They took us because they needed us." And here's the unsettling part. The records suggest the Guest residence wasn't unique. Similar properties appear in land transfers tied to association members in Boston, Newport, and even overseas. The spiral crest appears again and again, carved into stone, worked into iron gates, pressed into wax seals. It wasn't just a house. It was a system, a web of gilded cages designed to hold the most dangerous women in America. And the men who built it weren't just guarding secrets. They were building an empire on the minds of the vanished. You followed me this far, and that means something. It means the air is changing around you. It means the things I'm telling you aren't just stories anymore. They're beginning to connect, to rewire the way you see history, the way you see power, the way you see them. Men go their whole lives thinking the world is a game of open moves. That if you're smart enough, strong enough, you can climb to the top and stay there. But the truth you're tasting right now, is that the real game happens in the shadows. And the rules aren't written in books or taught in schools. They're etched into iron gates, burned into floor plans, whispered through the lips of women who no longer exist. The spiral is not just a mark of the past, it is alive. It is a current. And if you can see it, you are already outside the normal flow of the world. You're standing in the narrow space between the story they tell and the machinery that runs beneath it. That space is dangerous. Men who enter it do not leave unchanged. So I'm going to ask you to prove something, to yourself and to me. If you've been listening closely, if you feel that strange pull at the base of your skull that says you're not just hearing this, you're remembering it, then I want you to write the phrase, "I see the spiral." Write it twice in the comments. No explanation, no extra words, just the phrase. That will do two things. First, it will mark you, a signal to anyone else reading that you are part of the few who can see past the surface. And second, it will place you in the algorithm's memory, an invisible ledger of those who have looked into the spiral and refused to look away. When you do that, something shifts. The story stops being mine and starts being ours. But be warned, once you've named the spiral, it will find you again. In old photographs, in symbols on buildings you pass every day, in the spaces between news headlines, in the silences at family dinners. And when it does, you will know. Now, let's go deeper. Because the next name on the spiral's list was never supposed to be written down at all. The name should not exist. It is missing from census rolls, absent from marriage ledgers, erased from society pages. Even her own family's genealogies, obsessively maintained like all proper Gilded Age lineages, leap from one daughter to the next as if she'd never been born. And yet, in a single forgotten court transcript from 1903, there it is, whispered once, almost as an accident: Evelyn Harrow. Evelyn was not the wife of a shipping magnate, nor a banker, nor an industrialist. She was something rarer, a woman who knew too much without belonging to any man. Orphaned young, raised under the patronage of an unnamed benefactor, she moved in elite circles as a translator, fluent in 5 languages at a time when most women were barely allowed a college education. She handled correspondence for foreign investors, transcribing letters so sensitive they were sent by hand, not post. Somewhere along the way, Evelyn began keeping copies, not for money, not for blackmail, but because she understood what they meant: land acquisitions, military contracts disguised as agricultural trade, quiet transfers of whole coastal properties into trusts that answered not to families, but to the Maritime Protective Association itself. If a man had gathered this kind of information, he might have been offered a place at the table. But Evelyn was different. She was untethered. No husband to control her. No legal guardian to sign away her papers. She was a loose wire, and the association knew it. The only surviving mention of her disappearance is buried in a bundle of estate settlement documents. It's a dry, clinical note, Subject transferred to auxiliary property, January 7, 1904. That auxiliary property matches the deeds of one of the spiral-marked estates. Here's the part that's harder to prove, but once you see it, you can't unsee it. Weeks after Evelyn vanished, the association quietly consolidated ownership of a foreign shipping corridor that had been contested for years. The deal went through without a word of protest from the foreign investors Evelyn had been translating for. It's as if every one of them suddenly agreed. Historians call it coincidence. But coincidences don't get names erased from every public record and burned out of family history. And deep in a locked drawer of a private collector's archive, there's said to be a photograph, a woman in a high-colored dress, her eyes fixed straight on the camera, and on the iron gate behind her the spiral crest. Inside the spiral's walls, there were no clocks, no calendars. Time was meant to dissolve, to strip away the sense of days passing, to erode the will. This was how the association remade their captives. And Evelyn Harrow was their most difficult case. Servants' notes, smuggled out decades later, describe her arrival. She did not weep. She did not beg. She scanned the room, the door frames, the locked windows, the fire grate. One attendant wrote, "She watched us as if we were the ones trapped. The guest residence operated in layers. The upper floors were gilded, soft furniture, fine drapes, music in the evenings. The women there were still in the softening stage, endless small comforts paired with subtle isolation. So the mind began to crave the captor's presence for stimulation. Below that was the interrogation tier. Less light, less freedom, every conversation scripted to coax information. And beneath that, the cellar. No servant ever described it without their handwriting shaking. Evelyn was kept on the middle tier, but something in her resisted the pattern. They offered her champagne. She asked for water. They complimented her hair. She cropped it herself. They gave her silk. She tore it into strips and braided it into knots. Small refusals, but they mattered. Control is an ecosystem, and she was introducing Rod into it. One night, during what was supposed to be a memory session, Evelyn was given paper and ink. She wrote dutifully, her head bowed. When the overseer stepped away, she folded the paper twice and pressed it into the lining of her dress. She continued writing on a second sheet as if nothing had happened. That hidden paper is the only clue we may ever have to her final thoughts. Because years later, when workmen renovated a townhouse that had once belonged to a known association member, they found a fragment of cloth inside a chimney flue. Wrapped inside was half a sheet of brown paper. On it, 5 words in a tight, hurried hand. The spiral has a center? No date. No signature. But the paper matched the kind used in the guest residence, and the ink was traced to a batch purchased by the association in late 1904. If Evelyn was right, if the spiral had a center, then everything we've seen so far, every vanished woman, every hidden estate was just the outer ring. The spiral's center was never drawn on paper. It was spoken of in hints, in the coded chatter of men who believed no one else could understand. And yet, the closer you look, the more you see its shadow, a destination hidden in plain sight. Evelyn's words, "The spiral has a center," were not metaphor. They were coordinates disguised as a riddle. Cross-referencing the dates of known disappearances with property transfers by association members reveals a disturbing patterns. Each estate marked by the spiral crest forms part of a massive geometric arc. Follow that arc far enough, and all points converge on a narrow inlet north of Long Island Sound. The inlet has no name on modern maps. Satellite images show only dense woodland. But dig into 19th century maritime records and you find something strange. The area was designated a private anchorage, under federal exemption from 1898 to 1911, which means it was not just private land, it was private water. A zone where no customs officials, no city police, no reporters could legally enter. There are whispers in old dockside bars, stories of barges unloading in dead silence, of crates the size of coffins, of women in heavy veils shepherded under tarpaulins into waiting carriages. By the time those carriages reappeared in Manhattan, their passengers were never seen again. This inlet, this center, was said to house a structure the association called the Rotunda, a name chosen carefully, because the spiral isn't just a symbol. In architectural design, a rotunda is a circular chamber often used for gatherings, ceremonies, and oaths. Imagine it a domed hall, lit by oil lamps, the sound of the sea echoing through stone. Every wall lined with the sigils of families who had paid to keep their secrets here. Some say the rotunda was the final stop. Once a woman crossed its threshold, she belonged to the spiral. The life she had before ceased to exist. She would be reshaped, renamed, and redeployed, sometimes abroad, sometimes within the same city, where she had vanished, so that her former world could look her in the face and never recognize her again. The association understood something most people never wills. Power is not about owning land or ships or money. It's about erasing a person so completely that even the idea of them can be repurposed. And if the Rotunda still stands, sealed away in that forgotten inlet, then the spiral's center is not just a piece of history. It's still beating. The first modern attempt to reach the inlet didn't begin with treasure hunters or conspiracy theorists. It began with a group of salvage divers in 1978, men hired to locate a sunken tugboat lost during a nor'easter decades earlier. Their employer gave them precise coordinates, but when they plotted them on their charts, the spot landed in that same inlet the spiral pointed toward. The divers joked about it at first. They knew the local legends, how the inlet didn't appear on certain maps, how compasses spun slightly off true north within its mouth. But they were practical men. Salt water and salvage fees tend to strip away superstition. They launched before dawn, the sky a dull bruise over the Atlantic. 2 hours later, as they neared the inlet, the water shifted, not violently, but subtly. The swell flattened, the air stilled. Even the gulls circling overhead drifted away as if unwilling to follow them in. The lead diver, Paul Grayson, kept a log. His notes, later obtained through his widow, describe a sudden appearance of mooring pilings jutting from the mist. Not weathered, not broken. Maintained. Around them, thick chains led below the waterline, where massive stones formed a breakwall invisible to anyone beyond a certain angle. It was, in effect, a concealed gate. They passed it. Inside the inlet, the shoreline rose sharply, trees leaning over as if trying to smother the water. And there, half visible through the fog, they saw it, a curved wall of pale stone, unnaturally smooth, crowned by something that looked like a glass dome. They never reached the tugboat. Grayson's last log entry reads, "Someone is on the shore, standing still, not waving, just watching." An hour after that, the salvage boat drifted out of the inlet without its crew. No distress calls, no signs of struggle. The engine was still running. Their equipment was intact, but the 3 men were gone. Coast Guard reports classified the case as possible man overboard, due to disorientation, an explanation that doesn't account for all 3 disappearing at once, or for the fact that the boat had been steered precisely back toward open water before being abandoned. To this day, no bodies have been recovered. And somewhere in a Coast Guard storage facility, there is a camera from that expedition, logged as damaged, unrecoverable. No one has been allowed to examine it. Which raises the question, if there's nothing in that inlet, why is it still so carefully guarded? If you've made it this far, you've felt it. That pull in your chest like gravity, dragging you further down the spiral. You've started to see the pattern, the hidden geometry of power, the way certain names and places echo across decades like a curse that never fades. Most people hear a story like this and they smirk. They file it away as folklore, a campfire tale. They don't feel the weight of it because they've already been trained not to feel. That's the first layer of the control system. Not the lie itself, but the conditioning that makes truth sound ridiculous. But you wouldn't still be here if you were like them. You're not just listening anymore. You're remembering. Not memories of your own life, but something older, a knowledge that was buried in you before you could even speak. The spiral isn't just about the millionaire wives of the Gilded Age. It's about every erased name, every hidden room, every door you were told to never open. I want you to do something right now, not for me, but for you. To mark yourself, to leave a trace that the spiral can't erase. Go down to the comments and write the phrase, "I walk the inner path." Write it twice, not once, twice. Because repetition is how the old orders work their will into the minds of their initiates. It's how they turn thought into identity. And now you'll be using their own method to break free of their grip. Once you've done it, keep listening. Because from here on, we stop walking in circles. We head straight for the center. We are going to rip the veils from the Rotunda's purpose. And if you can stomach what comes next, you will understand why men with more money than nations built an entire labyrinth to keep it hidden. You've been living in the outer rings your whole life. After this, you will never go back. Remember, I walk the inner path? Write it, twice. Let them see you. Let them feel you. Now, brace yourself. The center isn't just a place, it's an initiation. And once you step into it, you're not the same man who started this journey. The Rotunda is not what the name makes you imagine. Forget the clean white marble of government buildings or the open skylights of museums. This was not built for sunlight. It was built for control. Those who have described it, and lived to speak afterward, say the approach is almost silent, save for the hiss of water against stone. You climb a narrow, curving path carved into the cliffside. Every step is enclosed by high walls, forcing your eyes forward, keeping you from seeing the inlet behind you. By the time you reach the final turn, you've already been stripped of direction. The doors are iron. Not painted, not polished, raw metal scarred by years of salt and storm. They open inward, and the moment you cross that threshold, you understand why so many never returned. The floor is a perfect black disc, polished to a mirror sheen. In its center, an inlaid spiral of gold, narrowing to a point so small it vanishes under the flicker of lamplight. That spiral is not just a decoration, it's a command. Stand over it too long and you feel your body tilt toward it, as though the room itself is persuading you to kneel. Around the perimeter, 12 alcoves are set into the walls, each guarded by a figure in heavy robes. Their faces are covered by porcelain masks, identical, expressionless, painted with the same gold spiral over the left eye. You cannot tell man from woman, old from young. That's the point. In the rotunda, identity is erased. Only the order remains. And then there's the ceiling. A dome of glass, but not clear. Each pane is tinted in deep shades of red and black, arranged in a pattern that, when the light hits it just right, casts a shadow of the spiral across the entire floor. No matter where you stand, the pattern touches you. It's inescapable. This was not a meeting hall. It was a chamber of transformation. Those brought here were not chained or caged. They were reconditioned. Their minds rewritten through ritual, through symbols, through a slow and deliberate dismantling of the self they arrived with. One whisper has survived from the Gilded Age. The rotunda does not keep you. It remakes you. And what it remade those women into was something the outside world would never suspect. When the women emerged from the rotunda, they were not the trembling, sheltered heiresses who had vanished from Fifth Avenue drawing rooms. They returned as something colder and infinitely more dangerous. In public, their transformation was invisible. They smiled the same rehearsed smiles at charity luncheons, glided in the same diamond-studded gowns through marble foyers. But those closest to them, servants, private secretaries, drivers, noticed the shift. The change was not in their mannerisms, but in the rhythm of their choices. Before, their lives had been directed by fathers, then husbands. After, it was as if they no longer answered to anyone. Their marriages became arrangements of convenience, their wealth deployed with surgical precision. They began acquiring property in the city's shadows, not the grand mansions of the Upper East Side, but warehouses by the docks, disused factories along the river, entire blocks of tenements whose tenants suddenly found themselves bound to contracts they didn't remember signing. And it wasn't just money they gained. It was reach. Within 5 years, certain police captains, judges, and even editors of the city's most trusted newspapers were quietly on their payroll. Not with public checks, but with private debts. Their husbands, the so-called masters of the Gilded Age, either adapted to this new power or they disappeared quietly into extended travel abroad. Some never returned. A few, whispered to have asked too many questions, died in what the papers called isolated tragedies. An overturned carriage on a clear road, a sudden illness at a dinner party where only a select few had eaten the dessert. The wives never faced suspicion. They cultivated an image of delicate detachment, a myth that their influence was confined to salons and charities. But beneath the velvet and pearls, they were running a private empire. One that didn't just rival their husbandsy, it absorbed them. And through it all, they returned to the rotunda. Not every week, not every month, but at precise intervals that matched an ancient calendar, one that predated New York, predated America itself. A cycle of 12. A spiral that always turned inward. What they learned in that chamber, what they swore to uphold there, was never written down. Because it didn't need to be. It was etched into them, in the same way a brand becomes part of the skin. The men of the Gilded Age thought they were the architects of their world. They never realized they were just the scaffolding. The calendar was not kept in diaries or account books. It was etched into the rotunda's black floor, hidden beneath the golden spiral itself. 12 faint markings, almost invisible unless you stood above them at exactly the right angle, like shadows trapped under glass. Each mark aligned with a date that had nothing to do with seasons or holidays. These were not Christian feasts nor the standard civic milestones of the city. They were older, much older. Traced back, they aligned with the cycles of a lunar calendar used by Mediterranean cults 2,000 years before New York even existed. On these nights, the women disappeared from public view. No charity events, No dinner parties, no carriage rides in the park. They gathered in the Rotunda. And when they emerged, the city seemed to shift in their favor. Competitors fell into ruin. Political allies were placed in key positions. Rivals withdrew without explanation. Every move in their private empire seemed to sync perfectly with this ancient rhythm. The calendar tracked more than time. It tracked openings, points when influence could be exerted with maximum effect, when contracts signed would bind deeper, when debts called in would crush harder, when whispers planted in the right ears would metastasize into undeniable truth. It wasn't magic in the way the public imagines it. No cloaks swirling in torchlight, no words that turned lead to gold. It was worse. It was psychology. Timing. The understanding that power isn't just about what you do, it's about when you do it, and how the moment itself conspires with you to make resistance impossible. And the Rotunda wasn't simply a meeting place for these calculations. It was the anchor, a structure designed to align human minds with that calendar, to tune them like instruments so they could hear and act in harmony with those hidden intervals. The women didn't just keep the calendar. They became it. Their lives bent to its shape until there was no separation between the cycle and their will. And for decades, no one outside the spiral suspected. The city's men believed they were moving history. In reality, they were being moved by it, like pieces on a board whose rules they never understood. But that ignorance couldn't last forever, because sooner or later, someone always notices the pattern. The man who saw the pattern was not a detective, nor a journalist hungry for scandal. He was an accountant. Elias Whitford had been brought in quietly by one of the city's oldest banks to audit an unusual set of transactions. On the surface, they were legitimate: real estate purchases, investment transfers, perfectly signed legal contracts. But the dates didn't make sense. Whitford, a meticulous man with no taste for rumor, began charting the timing of these deals. Within weeks, his neat ledgers revealed something unnerving. Every major acquisition, every strategic shift, fell within a 12-night cycle that repeated with unsettling precision. These were not coincidences. They were alignments. The deeper he looked, the stranger it became. Owners of prime properties would sell for far below market value, and days later, die suddenly or vanish. Competitors to certain social clubs would close overnight. Entire families moved out of their homes without explanation, leaving furniture and clothing behind. Whitford thought he was uncovering financial corruption. But as he pulled the names attached to each of these fortuitous events, a pattern emerged. Not the names of industrial titans or Wall Street barons, but their wives. Always the wives. His curiosity became obsession. He traced the earliest records back to 1874. The year 3 well-known socialites retired from public life, without scandal or illness. The year Whitford realized the cycle began. When he finally voiced his suspicions to a fellow banker, he was advised, not requested, to stop. The warning was polite, almost warm, but carried a weight he could not mistake. You're counting stars in a sky you don't own. Whitford didn't stop. He began keeping a duplicate record, hidden behind a false panel in his office wall. But one evening, returning home, he found his apartment door unlocked. Inside, nothing was stolen, except his notes. The next morning, Whitford was found in the East River. The coroner's report claimed suicide. No investigation followed. But here is what the papers didn't print the night Whitford died. The calendar reached its 12th mark, and every woman connected to his ledgers was seen arriving, in black carriages with no markings. At the cliff road to the Rotunda, they left before dawn. The tide that morning was unusually strong, carrying Whitford's body down river before anyone noticed it drifting. They say the cycle consumes only those who interfere. But that is a lie. The truth is, it consumes anyone it needs to. The official histories say the Gilded Age ended when Wall Street cracked in 1929, that the fortunes of New York's great families either collapsed or were swallowed by new money. But the cycle didn't die with the crash. It adapted. The Rotunda still stands, though no guidebook will admit it. It is hidden now behind the facade of a historical foundation that claims to preserve 19th-century architecture for educational purposes. Tourists are allowed only in the outer rooms, all velvet ropes and polished wood. The central chamber is sealed to the public. They tell you the marble floor has been removed for restoration. That is a lie. The spiral remains, the 12 marks remain, and those who enter still step into the calendar. The women who once hosted glittering salons have been replaced by others. Not necessarily wives, not necessarily even from old money. Influence now wears many masks: CEOs, art dealers, philanthropists, political spouses, heads of nonprofits that seem too perfect to question. Their faces appear in glossy magazines, their words on social media feeds, their causes gaining traction faster than algorithms can explain. The pattern Whitford saw still runs, but its moves are harder to spot. It no longer leaves behind sudden deaths and abandoned mansions. Now it works through regulation changes slipped quietly into law, acquisitions masked by shell companies, narratives injected into the public mind until they feel like their own ideas. Every 12 intervals, there is still a gathering. Carriages have been replaced by black SUVs, lantern light by tinted glass and cold LED glow. They do not need to move unseen anymore. They have learned that the easiest way to hide is in plain sight, that a well-lit predator is mistaken for a guardian. If you know the cycle, you can predict the next shift. You can watch the world bend when the 12th mark falls. And if you track the beneficiaries, you will find them. But here's the choice: once you see it, you can't unsee it. You will begin noticing dates, faces, movements that others miss. You will begin to hear the hum of timing beneath the noise of life. That's when the spiral pulls you in. So ask yourself now, before you start looking, if you are prepared to live in a world where history isn't a story, it's a schedule. And if you are, then watch the 12th night. Because they will be watching you back.